Hey, I'm SMACKDOWN, and today we're doing an EX tier list for the last week of the SPACETIME SMACKDOWN meta. So we have entered the final week. This is actually quite a short one. Usually we get 6 weeks, or we've had 6 weeks between expansions. But this one is just a month with the new expansion coming out end of Feb. And to be honest, it can't come quickly enough, unfortunately, because I feel like the meta has skewed into a not so great place right now. So we're just going to look at what I think, where I think all the EX mons are at right now. S tier is basically, in my opinion, too good. So obviously what we're going to do is we're going to put Executive EX right there. So I put in S tier last time I did a tier list. It was kind of more semi-serious. But with SPACETIME SMACKDOWN, it's gotten a lot. I mean, literally it's gotten more tools through like Giant Cape to make it 180 HP, or Rocky Helmet to do 20 more damage. It's something from Genetic Apex that was good. I think the card itself is probably a bit too good, but that's fine on its own. But the problem is that as more cards have come out, it's only sort of amplified its power. And now we're in a situation where it's the overrep in tournaments of this card is a bit much. And so by overrep, what I mean is in the general meta of tournaments and the general meta looking at Limitless, it's about 20% of all decks, which is a lot. It's basically kind of what Mewtwo was doing, I think, roughly, back in the day. But, however, what we're seeing in tournaments now is it's 20% of the meta, but probably about 40 or 50% of the decks in top cuts, which is yes, it's a big overrep. It's not good. It's definitely a big red flag that something needs to be done about it. And my hope would be with the new expansion, there's some kind of executor targeted hate. So maybe it's something to do with healing or supporters or better, more something, maybe amplify fire decks a bit more. Because there are, I mean, let's go down, speaking of fire, let's go down to A tier. So an example of an A tier card is Charizard EX. So this basically means if there's a tournament and there's a top cut, I would expect to see a few, if not several of these in that top cut. And that's basically what we see with Charizard EX. It's usually like maybe 1, 2, maybe a handful of Charizard EX cards. So it's a stage 2, which usually I would, mark it down a bit for that. But just the fact that it's still the only Pokemon that does 200 damage is massive. So obviously being able to one-shot Executive EX, or in fact anything in the game, is pretty impressive. Because I think at the moment, like the highest health pool you can get is Venusaur EX at 190 with a cape is 210. And even that with weakness, Charizard does 220. And also it's a stage 2, but like we've got Pokemon Communication now, which makes it a bit more reliable. You'll get into the Charizard. It's not the most exciting deck in my opinion, but it has a place because of how strong it is into the current meta. Following on from Charizard, there's another card which is commonly in the deck, which is Moltres EX, and that's an example of a B tier card in my opinion. It's something like you will see it in the top cut, but it's generally more of a supporting role, or like a not quite, can be good, but it's usually not the kind of central punch of the team. That makes sense. So yeah, Moltres obviously turns up as much as Charizard because they are linked basically in the same deck, but people are running Charizard as the main threat. Moltres is just there to support it. So C tier is can be good. The kind of issue we've got now is because Executive EX skews the meta so badly. C tier is quite big now, just because there's a lot of decks which maybe could push up into B, maybe A tier, and they're just not. So an example of a C tier would be something like, actually let's pull out another EX. So something like Venusaur EX. You might see a C tier, I would say you might see one of these in the top cut. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. But it's not strong enough to be, maybe there is some kind of secret in there. It got lucky on the day, had a really good pilot, but it's not, can be good, but it's not common enough in the top cuts. It's just overshadowed by the SA B tier. D tier, so now, let's adjust this a little bit. So for something I actually forgot to put in my last tier list was Lapras EX. So this is an example of D tier, which is just doesn't really appear in top cuts at all. Like if I see something in D tier appear in a top cut, I'll do like a little double take when I see it in the stats. But usually it's an anomaly. So now we've established the tiers. Now let's look at the rest. Starting with a Licky EX, or Licky EX, C tier. Can do good. Usually if you've got, it's 4 energy for 100 damage plus whatever you roll. Usually partnered with Dialga to ramp up to 4 energy. And it's fine, yeah, absolute C tier. You see it occasionally. Speaking of Dialga, my feeling is that it's B tier, so 150 health is good. Metallic Turbo, 2 energy for 30 means it does... Generally it's B tier because it's more of a supporter, like it doesn't really do a lot of damage, like 2 energy for 30 isn't great. But the ability to give 2 energy to something on your bench is really good for building up, yeah, like a Licky or like a Mew or anything else really. Could be another Dialga or like a Melmetal. So it's a really good support Pokemon, but not strong enough to really lead the team. Next we got Darkrai, which I would put in A. So finally Dark got an EX, or a couple of EXs. And Darkrai, unsurprisingly, being a bit of a sort of flagship legendary, is really, really good. So the Nightmare Aura ability to do chip damage to your opponent is really good because you can just sit this behind a Druddigon or something else on the front line and just chip away 20. And also the chip 20 also means you amplify the damage you're doing through other Pokemon. 3 for 80 is absolutely okay, but just the chip damage it does is enough to push it into A tier in my opinion. Gallade EX. I feel like maybe it's low B tier. It's not, again, stage 2. So, I mean, even with Pokemon communication, it sometimes can be unreliable. But the damage it can do is quite... Again, 2 energy for 70, and then you're doing it an extra 20 for the energy they have on their Pokemon, so it's usually like 90, maybe 110 on average. But it's generally, I think it's good just because of the energy investment. And I've seen... You don't see many, but it's just it pops up in top cuts occasionally. Weavile EX. I don't know about this one, because initially it was Darkrai's best friend, because Darkrai would chip for 20 and then Weavile EX would do 70 damage. So that's 90 overall, which is really good. And again, 1 energy is pretty good. It doesn't really fit anywhere because what we've seen is it sort of needs another source of chip damage, and that doesn't really exist in the game. There's like, yes, you can do poison, but that usually requires a bit of setup. Whereas something like Darkrai can let you come out of the gates. So I would probably put Weavile in, I think C tier is good enough for that, just because it's not strong enough to stand on its own. No, sort of B tier. Like if you're, I think like Moltres, if you're partnering up with like the A tier decks, you're probably a B tier. Disappointing. So I was disappointed that another Ghost Pokemon was a bit mid. So Mismagius, 2 energy for 70, not terrible, not amazing. It's a stage 1. The main thing it does is your opponent's Pokemon is confused, which is okay and can be like game winning, but I still feel like it's a C tier card. It's not that great. It's like it's this close to greatness, because if it was 80 damage, now we're talking, because that puts it makes it a lot more reliable for like 2-shotting 150s or even like a 160 like Executor. So if it was 80 damage, I think it would see more play, I feel, because that and the confusion, but just as it is, it's not quite strong enough on its own. Pachirisu, I feel at the moment is A tier, because you'll usually always see 1, 2, a few of these in a top cut, and specifically it's the Pachirisu 18 trainer decks. So you're relying on just Pachirisu with tools to come out and do 80 damage more reliably. This is sort of dethroned. I mean, there are other reasons why Pikachu doesn't exist at A tier anymore, but Pachirisu has sort of dethroned it as like a bit more of a sort of a like reliable damage dealer. So I usually expect to see 1, maybe a few Pachirisus in the top cut. Infernape. I feel like if this was a stage 1, it would be A or B tier, and it looks like it should be good, because 2 energy, 140, that's a dead Executor EX. But again, stage 2, okay, that's tricky. You discard all the energy as well, which isn't a massive problem, because usually you're running Dawn, so you can move other energy onto it and just attack like repeatedly. 0 retreat cost is really good. Is it C tier? No, I'm gonna say C tier. I think it's overshadowed a bit by Charizard, because you see them in the same deck. It's like You see Moltres, Charizard, you see Moltres, Infernape. Charizard generally does better overall just because of the 200 damage. Because, okay, you do 160 to Executive EX, but then it cape. If it's got a cape, then things get a bit tricky. It's just, yeah, it's almost there. Cresselia EX, another one of the promos, straight into D tier. It's just not, given that it's supposed to be a sort of mirror opposite to Darkrai, it's just not anywhere near the power level. The chip damage is so much more powerful than I heal myself for 20 when you put energy on me. That's fine. 3 for 80. It makes sense in Darkrai because his main ability is good, which usually means you're going to do 100. Cresselia just doesn't, the ability isn't good enough. Just straight up. Yanmega. So Yanmega EX. I've been playing a lot of Yanmega with Skarmory, and I really like it. So 120's damage is good because that'll two-shot an Executive EX through, if they have like an Erica and a potion to heal 70, you can still two-shot it. The 3 colorless energy is good because then you can mix it with a number of different things. You could play it with Dialga. I play it with Skarmory. You can play it with Executive EX as well. You discard an energy when you attack, which is a bit negligible because usually by the time you bring the Yanmega out to attack, it's sort of the end game. And if you don't succeed with the Yanmega, you're sort of done. But I would put this definitely as a B tier, I think. If it's stage 2, absolutely C tier. But as it is, it's okay. Palkia EX is going to be another A tier for me. 150 bulk. The thing I like is the 1 water slash for 30, which is really good. Because then you two-shot most basics with 60 health. And Dimensional Storm, 150 and then 20 on the bench. You discard pretty much all your energy. Isn't great, but also with water decks, with Vaporeon and Misty and other things, it's not, and Manaphy as well. Often what happens is, yes, you burn the energy with Dimensional Storm, but maybe you've got some energy on the bench and then you just Vaporeon them back onto the Palkia and hit again. I think it's very, easily like the top water deck at the moment. Wigglytuff EX, I would put straight in the C tier. Again, kind of rare, but you do see it. So 3 for 80 is not good. Sleep, again, coin flips, but that can just win games straight up. Marowak EX, I would have put it, I think I put it B tier last time. I think it's still C tier. I've seen it run with Lucario, and that's okay, because then you're doing 80, maybe 160, 180. So one thing that's happened now is, the card pool's gotten bigger. So there's more competition, so a lot of stuff which would have sat at B tier just drops into C. And another C tier would be a Machamp. 120 damage, like I said with Yanmega, 120 damage is really good right now. Also because you can Giovanni them to 130, which gets rid of Mews and Celebes. And you one-shot Pachirisu. 120 is a solid damage number for 3 energy. However, stage 2, which pushes it down to C tier in my opinion. Gengar, as much as it pains me to do this, D tier, I think now. Previously, it was like, maybe you might see a Gengar now, but it hasn't got the damage. The ability, it sounds good on paper, like stopping supporters. If it didn't have the restriction of needing to be in the active slot, I think this could even be B tier. Because shutting off Erica's, Cyrus, Sabrina is good, but having to get to the stage 2 and then put it in the active slot, it's just not reliable enough. Mewtwo has taken a pretty big fall as well. I think mostly it's like a gameplay style because of Cyrus now. So the combination of Cyrus and Sabrina, and then just generally there's more chip damage and like ways to hit the bench. The whole thing Mewtwo would often do is just cycling out Mewtwo's or other tanks until you had the 4 energy for the side drive and you had your Gardevoirs out. These days it's not, I don't think it's a bad deck. It's just, it doesn't perform anywhere near as well, and it's too vulnerable to a lot of changes in the meta. So I think it's properly dropped to D tier. Like I think since since SPACETIME SmackDown, maybe you might have seen them a little bit in the first week, but they just dropped off a cliff. And actually, while we're here, let's pop. Yeah, maybe let's say D tier for Pikachu. It's just overshadowed, I think, by Pachirisu because it tends to be more reliable that you'll get a tool than you'll have like a full bench. And the kind of switching in and out doesn't really work as well anymore with Cyrus. So I think it's D tier for the moment. Zapdos, in my opinion, it's still a B tier card, but the problem is it just doesn't have a good enough partner right now because Pikachu's dropped off a cliff. Pachirisu can run on its own. I think you actually probably can do a Pachirisu Zapdos maybe. So Pachirisu Zapdos is good, but I think it's still a good card. Articuno, A tier, mostly because of it opens up the turn 1 wins with Blizzard, or turn 1, turn 2 wins with Blizzard if you've got a good, even like a moderately okay Misty row. And chipping 10 to the bench is nice now with Cyrus. So I still feel like it's A tier because it slots quite well into Palkia decks. And you can still do Articuno 18 trainers. Blastoise, I mean, with some like Vaporeon and Manaphy, Water's improved, but I still feel like Blastoise, it's okay, but is it as good as Palkia? Probably not really. An example of something which is probably still as good in A tier is Gyarados. It competes with Palkia, but you still absolutely see like 1 or 2, maybe a few in the top cut. Another water would be Starmie. I feel like Starmie is B tier. Like Zapdos, it doesn't really have a solid enough partner to push it into A tier, but it's still like a really good aggro card. Arcanine, good, but I think with Giant Cape, a lot of things that it would have one-shot have sort of are out of its reach now. Infernape kind of is probably a bit better, and then Charizard is just better still. So Arcanine decks just don't get a look in these days. Aerodactyl, I still feel that's B tier, because the ability is actually quite strong. Land Crush, you can come out quite quickly with Land Crush. I think maybe, no, actually, C tier. Just because it's a fossil, like, if at some point we get a more reliable way to pull out fossils, I would look at this again at maybe going into B tier, but until that day. Pidgeot EX, again, C tier. I think, again, going back to Executive EX, because it skewed the meta so wildly, because this is taking up like 40% of top cuts, there's so much competition for the other 60% that stuff like Pidgeot EX just gets pushed out. Celebi, non-shock is A. Goes really well with Executive because once you somehow get through the Executive EX, there's a Celebi that's been charging up on the bench, and it just flips for like 150, 200. And usually, even if you got lucky and they didn't pull into their Ericas for the Executor, they will probably be sat on them for the Celebi. I think I said in the last EX tier list that I was using Celebi just because Grass doesn't have a more reliable equivalent. So if they do, then Celebi probably drops down a little bit, but right now it's still good. Finally, Mew. Now I thought Mew was... Initially I thought, okay, Mew's dropped down to B tier because if it genome hacks a Palkia, maybe the Palkia's got a giant cape, so you can't one-shot it. But I still feel, Charizard exists. Even being able to like throw out your own Dimensional Storm is really good, Rampaging Whirlpool. There's still a lot of high damage attacks, which I think are worth keeping a Mew around for. So I still feel like it's definitely A tier. So that was the EX tier list. Hopefully, in a week, we get things shaken up a bit more with the new set. But what do you think? If you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I stream tournament runs on Twitch around the weekends and try to make videos about the competitive scene in Pokemon TCG Pocket. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.